I still remember the way the young banker shifted in his seat, trying to mask the confusion that flickered across his face. He glanced at the screen, then at my brother, then back at me, as if struggling to reconcile what the system was telling him with the arrogance radiating from the man beside me. My brother, David, lounged with his arms spread wide like he owned the entire institution, tapping his pen against the desk with all the subtlety of a brass band. We'd come to finalize new lending terms for the family business, or rather, as he liked to say, his business now. He spent the drive rehearsing how he'd command the meeting, how the bank would listen to the real leader. But when the banker cleared his throat and said, "As majority owner, Mrs. Harding, we'll need your approval first," the room fell into a silence so sharp it felt like glass. My brother's pen slipped from his hand. His jaw tightened, the smirk evaporating as the weight of those words settled between us. I didn't say a thing. I only watched him, watched the slow realization crawl across his face that the empire he'd been bragging about, the one he'd supposedly taken over, was not his to command. It was in that moment, when his pride cracked like old plaster, that I knew the truth had finally surfaced. And yet, only weeks earlier, I had been in the dark myself, too trusting, too focused on family harmony to imagine how far he'd go. The betrayal had begun quietly, with forged signatures, silent account transfers, and late-night meetings he thought I would never uncover. But justice has a way of collecting breadcrumbs, and I had learned to follow them with patience sharper than any blade. So as the banker repeated, gently but firmly, "We cannot proceed without her authorization," I watched my brother's confidence drain like water through a sieve. And though he didn't know it yet, this meeting was only the beginning of the unraveling that he had set in motion. I felt no triumph then, only certainty. The kind a woman earns after a lifetime of being underestimated. He claimed he ran everything. But the truth was about to run over him. He didn't yet know I had the documents in my bag that would expose everything. My name is Evelyn Harding, and I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to understand that family wounds leave the deepest scars because they are inflicted with familiar hands. I am not a dramatic woman. I'm measured, steady, and perhaps too forgiving for my own good. I raised 2 children, buried 1 husband, ran a family business for decades, and cared for a mother who loved us both but always believed my brother's storms were just phases. I've weathered enough in my life to know that anger burns fast, but truth burns clean. When I speak to you now, I do so not as a victim of betrayal but as a woman who learned how quiet strength can be mistaken for weakness. People look at gray hair and softened features and assume you've stepped aside from the world. But age does not erase competence. If anything, it sharpens the mind because you've lived long enough to understand what truly matters. For years I let David believe he was indispensable to the company. He had energy, charm, and a gambler's confidence. I believed structure would help him, give him purpose, maybe even teach him loyalty. My mistake wasn't trusting him. It was trusting that he knew the value of that trust. I should have remembered that he had always reached for the world with both hands, grasping at anything that glittered. But I also knew, quietly, without ever announcing it, that the company my husband and I built remained legally under my control. I never flaunted that, and I never needed to. I assumed he understood we were partners, not competitors. That assumption would soon be proven dangerously naive. As I sat across from him in that bank office, watching his face turn the color of sour milk, I felt the first tremors of a storm I hadn't intended to unleash, but was now fully prepared to weather. Before that moment, I had tried to trust him, but then I discovered something in our mother's mail that changed everything. I still remember the way the young banker shifted in his seat, trying to mask the confusion that flickered across his face. He glanced at the screen, then at my brother, then back at me, as if struggling to reconcile what the system was telling him with the arrogance radiating from the man beside me. My brother, David, lounged with his arms spread wide like he owned the entire institution, tapping his pen against the desk with the smug rhythm of a man who thought the world bowed at his command. We'd come to finalize new lending terms for the Harding Property Group, or rather, as he liked to say, his company now. He spent the drive rehearsing lines about expansion, control, and leadership, as though I were merely a relic he tolerated out of obligation. But when the banker cleared his throat and said, "As majority owner, Mrs. Harding, we will need your authorization first," the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The words hit David like a slap. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the polished desk. He turned toward me with a bewildered stare, the kind usually reserved for magic tricks or sudden accidents. I stayed still, hands folded neatly in my lap, allowing him to swim in the truth he had long tried to bury. The banker repeated himself, this time more carefully, as if worried David might explode. All binding decisions require Mrs. Harding's approval. She holds 62% ownership. In that instant, something in my brother's expression cracked. It wasn't anger at first. It was confusion. Then realization. And then the panic he tried desperately to hide. He had spent months claiming he was in charge. He had strutted through meetings, made declarations, issued orders, and insisted that staff defer to him. He had even started introducing himself in town as the sole head of Harding Properties. And yet here, in a cold office with LED lights humming above us, the truth surfaced with simple administrative clarity. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because the documents in my bag, sealed, notarized, and indisputable, held the full story he didn't know I had pieced together. The forged signatures. The unauthorized transfers. The loan applications he had submitted behind my back. And the very mistake that would unravel everything he had tried to build on lies. What he didn't yet know was that one envelope on my lap contained the final proof of his betrayal. My name is Evelyn Harding, and I am 63 years old. I have lived long enough to understand that silence is often mistaken for weakness, and calmness for compliance. But the truth is, life has etched a different kind of strength into me. Steady, quiet, and anchored in survival. I'm not a loud woman. I don't raise my voice, and I've never needed to. Not when clarity does the work for you. I lost my husband 13 years ago, and when grief loosened its grip on me, I devoted myself to the property business we had built from nothing. 4 rental complexes, a set of commercial storefronts, and several acres of inherited family land. It was stable, respectable work. Honest work. David was 10 years younger, the kind of child who always ran faster than his legs could manage and often crashed because of it. Our mother said he was spirited, but I always knew he had a hunger for shortcuts. Still, when he came to me after a divorce and asked for meaningful work, I opened the door. I believed structure would give him purpose. I believed responsibility might mature him. I believed family was worth investing in. But people don't change simply because you hope they will. They change because they choose to. And my brother, God bless him, chose envy. Chose entitlement. Chose to interpret my patience as obliviousness. By the time I realized something was wrong, we were months into patterns I should have questioned sooner. Tenants contacting him instead of me, contractors being paid late because he rearranged schedules, and staff whispering that he introduced himself as the decision-maker now. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was insecurity disguised as swagger. I had no idea yet that he had crossed from bravado into deception. And then one afternoon, while visiting our aging mother, I picked up a piece of mail addressed to the business that had been accidentally delivered to her home instead. A thin white envelope. A return address from a local bank we didn't usually work with. Something inside me prickled. I opened it, and what I found inside made my hands tremble. The envelope contained a loan pre-approval notice for Harding Property Group, addressed specifically to David. It referenced a meeting he had supposedly attended, discussing expansion plans and collateral assessments. I read the page twice, each sentence burning a little deeper as reality formed its shape. A bank loan? New collateral? Without me. Without even a conversation? The terms referenced assets we owned jointly, assets he had no authority to pledge, assets that had my late husband's name carved into their history. When I asked my mother if she had seen anything else come addressed to David from financial institutions, her brows knit in worry. He's been using my address for some things, she admitted softly. He said you were overwhelmed, dear. That stung more than I expected. Not because he'd lied about me, but because my mother, even in her foggier years, believed him. She adored him the way mothers sometimes adore the child who needs the most saving. Growing up, our roles had always been clear. I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who cleaned up messes quietly. David was charming, unpredictable, and often forgiven before he even apologized. Father died when I was 20, leaving a void David filled with defiance. Mother used patience where discipline was needed, and I, too young to be his parent, too old to be merely a sibling, tried to compensate. Responsibility became my second skin. And resentment, though I never spoke it, flickered now and then like a porch light left on overnight. When he joined the family business, I let him share the office beside mine. I taught him the fundamentals. I trusted him with vendors, with spreadsheets, with communications. I thought mentorship would bridge the gap between us that childhood imbalance had carved. But looking back, every warning had been subtle but visible, like a crack beneath fresh paint. Staff mentioned he took meetings without telling me. Tenants said he hinted at upcoming projects I had never approved. Contractors said he promised timelines I hadn't signed off on. Still, I willed myself to see his ambition as eagerness, not entitlement. I told myself family deserved patience. But betrayal rarely arrives with a loud crash. It seeps in gradually, turning the air toxic before you detect the scent. That night, after finding the loan letter, I went home and sat at my kitchen table, turning the paper over in my hands. My husband used to say paperwork always reveals a person's true intentions. And suddenly I understood that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. A strategy. A rewriting of roles in which David, at some point, had decided he was the rightful heir. The next morning, I checked the company's financial portal, and what I saw confirmed my worst fear. He had changed access permissions. Subtly at first, just enough to make things inconvenient. My administrative settings had been downgraded without my knowledge, while his had been elevated. A few vendor payments had been rerouted, not missing but redirected through accounts I didn't recognize. And worse, several documents bore my digital signature, yet I had never signed them. I felt a chill travel through me, a sensation I hadn't felt since the days after my husband's passing when the world felt unstable. I clicked on one document, a loan application drafted 3 months earlier. Collateral listed included our Jefferson Square complex, valued at over $3 million. My signature sat at the bottom in perfect replication. But I knew it wasn't mine. I knew every loop and curve of my handwriting and every digital verification I had ever approved. This was a forgery, plain and simple. I breathed through my nose, steady and slow. Panic would help no one. I printed every document, every altered permission record, every questionable transaction. And then I requested an activity log, one that showed the exact user account initiating changes. Nearly all traces pointed to David. But one detail sank deeper than the rest. He had attempted to change ownership records for the company with a third-party corporate registrar. Not finalized, but initiated. And the draft listed him as controlling owner with a 90% stake. He had planned to erase me. It was betrayal not just of trust but of family legacy, of my husband's memory, of decades of sacrifice. My hands shook, but not from fear, from resolve. I gathered everything into a folder and locked it in my drawer. Before confronting him, I needed expert guidance. And documentation wasn't enough. I needed proof of intent. I reached out to our attorney, Mr. Whitaker, a man who had handled our family estate for years. When I showed him the papers, he blinked slowly and said, "Evelyn, this is not carelessness. This is deliberate maneuvering." That night, alone in my office with only the hum of the heater for company, I stared at the evidence spread across my desk. My brother had tried to seize everything my husband and I had built. I understood then that the next steps would require meticulous precision. And that's when I discovered the meeting he didn't know I planned to attend. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at the bank, an appointment between David and a loan officer to finalize paperwork for a line of credit allegedly approved by both owners. I arrived early, sitting quietly in the lobby while he strutted in minutes later, unaware I was already there. From my corner, I watched him greet the staff with that inflated confidence he wore like cologne. When the loan officer came to escort him back, I stood. "I'll join you," I said calmly. The officer, recognizing my name, nodded without question. David froze mid-step, his mouth parting but no sound emerging. I didn't look at him. Not yet. Inside the office, I let the officer begin. He opened a file filled with paperwork, applications, collateral documents, agreements, all supposedly signed by me. I let him talk through each page before finally sliding my own folder across the desk. "These signatures are forged," I said quietly. The officer's eyes widened. David sputtered, insisting it was a misunderstanding, that I must have forgotten signing something. But the timestamps, the access logs, the mismatched verification codes, all of it painted a portrait he couldn't talk his way out of. The bank halted everything. An internal inquiry began immediately. And with their legal team now involved, the gravity of his actions escalated beyond family conflict. After leaving the bank, I met with Mr. Whitaker again. We spent 2 hours reviewing ownership records, corporate filings, and control provisions. And that's when he reminded me of something I had forgotten. Years ago, after my husband died, I had consolidated shares for estate simplicity. Meaning, legally and indisputably, I held majority ownership, with no mechanism for transfer without my explicit, notarized approval. Power he had assumed for himself had never been his. We built a timeline, cross-referenced evidence, and prepared a legal notice for him. Professional. Bulletproof. But I wasn't ready to serve him yet. Not until I understood the full extent of his actions. So I requested tenant statements, contractor confirmations, and emails from staff, all of which revealed he had been telling people for months that he ran everything now. He claimed I was stepping back, retiring, handing control to him. None of which was true. Every lie layered upon the next, forming a tower high enough to collapse under its own weight. And collapse it finally did, on the day he tried to push through a deal that would destroy him. The deal involved selling a parcel of our commercial land to a developer at a suspiciously low rate. I got word through a contractor who overheard David bragging about the easy money he was about to score. My instincts screamed. I arrived at the property office just as he was preparing paperwork for the developer. He looked startled to see me, almost annoyed, as though I were interrupting a performance he'd rehearsed meticulously. "Evelyn, I've got this under control," he insisted, standing tall, chest puffed. "This is my operation now." I set my folder on the table and opened it slowly, letting the silence stretch. He shifted, his bravado wobbling as I laid out document after document. Printouts, logs, notarized certifications, expert analyses, all pointing to one undeniable truth. "You forged my signature. You attempted to transfer corporate control. You misrepresented ownership. You applied for loans using assets you do not own," I said, each sentence measured, calm, factual. His face drained. "I was trying to help the business grow," he whispered, but even he didn't believe it. "No," I replied softly. "You were trying to take it." Then I handed him the legal notice prepared by Mr. Whitaker, formal initiation of internal misconduct proceedings, a requirement before filing for injunctions and criminal investigation. His hands trembled as he held it. "This can't be happening," he murmured. "It is happening," I said. "And it is happening because of your choices." He tried to plead, then to bargain, then to blame everyone but himself. But the turning point wasn't his. It was mine. Because for the first time, I saw him clearly, not as the boy I raised in my father's absence, not as the brother I tried to save, but as a man who had willingly tried to erase me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolute. The kind of resolve that comes after a woman has finally decided to stop absorbing the consequences of someone else's chaos. He didn't yet know the bank had already flagged his actions, and the fallout was about to hit harder than anything I could have orchestrated. 3 days later, the bank summoned us, This time not for negotiations, but for compliance review. David walked into the meeting pale and tight-lipped. The same officer who had looked nervous before now appeared entirely composed, backed by two senior administrators. They presented findings: unauthorized applications, falsified signatures, discrepancies in submitted financial statements, and attempted collateralization of assets he had no right to use. Each point landed like a hammer. His confidence shattered under the weight of paperwork. They informed him that all accounts associated with his unauthorized activities were frozen pending investigation. They also notified him that formal reports had been filed with regulatory authorities. He tried to blame confusion, clerical errors, technical glitches, but the evidence was precise. Time-stamped. Verified. Irrefutable. Finally, he turned to me, eyes raw and pleading. "Evelyn, please. Fix this." But it wasn't mine to fix. It never had been. "I warned you," I said softly. "You chose not to listen." In the days that followed, vendors stopped taking his calls. Staff deferred exclusively to me. Tenants addressed concerns directly to my office again. The developer he'd attempted to swindle backed out entirely. His access credentials were revoked. His role dissolved. And when his lawyer contacted mine, hoping for negotiation, they were met with a single response: "We will not pursue criminal charges if he resigns permanently and returns all misappropriated funds." He had no leverage left. So he signed. Quietly. Without witness or applause. The downfall he had set in motion swallowed him whole, not because I punished him, but because truth finally cornered him. But even after his resignation, one last confrontation waited, one that neither of us could avoid. The confrontation came unexpectedly. I was leaving the office late one evening when I found him waiting by my car, shoulders slumped in a posture I hadn't seen since he was a boy who'd broken something he couldn't repair. The parking lot lights cast long shadows around us, and for a moment, I saw him not as the man who betrayed me, but as my mother's son. My father's son. My brother. He approached slowly, hands stuffed deep in his pockets. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. His voice was thin, stripped of its usual bravado. "It went exactly as far as your actions carried it," I replied. He nodded, eyes fixed on the pavement. "I was jealous," he admitted. "Everything you touched turned stable. Solid. People respected you. I thought if I could take control, maybe I'd finally be somebody." It was an explanation, not an excuse, and I treated it as such. "You were already somebody," I said quietly. "But you tried to become someone else at my expense." He swallowed, his throat bobbing. "Are you going to cut me out forever?" I considered his question carefully. "Not out of the family," I said. "But out of the business, yes. That door is closed." He nodded again, tears threatening but refusing to fall. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and though the apology didn't undo the harm, it softened something rigid inside me. Not trust. Not forgiveness. But acceptance that the situation had reached its inevitable end. As he walked away, shoulders still heavy, I felt the air shift around me. The business was stable again. The accounts were restored. Staff felt secure. Tenants felt heard. And for the first time in months, I felt peace settle across my chest. Not triumphant. Just steady. Clear. Whole. And with clarity came one final realization, one I would share with anyone willing to listen. What my brother never understood is that leadership is not seized, it is earned. Control gained through deception is not control at all. It is a ticking clock counting down to collapse. I tell this story not to relish his downfall but to illuminate a truth many of us learn too late. That trust is a currency more valuable than property, and once spent recklessly, it cannot be replenished. I also learned something about myself. That quiet strength is not weakness. That being measured does not mean being passive. And that age grants a clarity the younger version of me never possessed. The clarity to confront wrongdoing without rage, to seek justice without vengeance, and to protect what matters without losing my humanity. If you take anything from my experience, let it be this. Document everything, trust your instincts, and never allow someone else's insecurity to redefine your worth. Families can wound us deeply, but truth, steady and calm, has a way of drawing boundaries where chaos once lived. My brother claimed he ran everything. But the truth was always the majority owner. And when the time came, it spoke louder than he ever could.